In this video, I transitioned my PC from an RTX 3070 to the new all-singing, all-dancing RTX 4070 Super, and tried to see if there's any improvement at all for sim racing in VR using the Quest 3, and all from an older gamer's perspective. Released to great fanfare at CES a week or so ago, the 4070 Super, on paper at least, teases a big step for anyone with the old 30 series or even older. Even apparently someone with a 3090. However, specs on the page don't always translate to a better sim racing experience. Sometimes it's not even a little bit better. The 4070 Super, as you can see here, does have a lot more high-powered stuff inside it, including the all-important 12GB RAM that it now has, as opposed to the 3070, which was just restricted to 8GB. And that, combined with an increase in CUDA cores and lots of other improvements, can only help when pushing out graphics to the computer and ultimately to the VR headset, which means it should be a bit of a boost, at least for my system. And initial tests seem to support this bland assumption of mine that throwing money into a PC is always going to make it a better, faster, meaner machine.
You're deluded.
I am testing on an i5-13600K with 64GB of DDR4 and the OS on an NVMe and feeling HAPPY. If you want to know more about my PC, there is a video on this channel where I show how it was built and explain my rationale for picking the bits I did pick, including the now defunct 3070.
Sad, but true.
The 3070 that's coming out of my PC is the vanilla version, no TI here, and is also a Gigabyte 3-fan solution, which has always been a bit of a tight fit in my case. So for the 4070 Super, I have gone with the 2-fan solution from Asus. This is the OC variant of the Asus 4070 Super, which I bought as there was only a €10 price difference between this and the non-OC version. Once I introduced the 4070 Super to my PC, the 3D Mark test software suite showed an increase in comparison to the 3070, which was not that surprising. But the results for Time Spy look something like this. Not too shabby, with a graphical increase of around 47%, which seems to agree with most benchmarks on YouTube. Not sure why the CPU in this test is 0.3% worse. Possibly I had something running in the background that I shouldn't have. The other test in the 3D Mark software suite tell a similar story, with Speedway and Port Royale both showing similar results, which themselves seem to confer with GP user Benchmark's own findings. It's a nice increase, not mind-blowing, but it should be within everyone's expectations. This is a 4070 Super, not a 4090 Super. But none of this should be a surprise. The 4070 Super is effectively a slightly less powerful version of the 4070 Ti, which itself was rebranded 4080. That's an even long story. So it's going to do well in the benchmark tests when compared with the older 3070. That's a given. In my experience, these benchmark tests don't always indicate how a PC will stand up to the rigors of playing an actual game, especially if that game is a resource-hungry sim racer. Even more so when I use VR to play the aforementioned sim racer. So, what sort of difference can the 4070 Super actually make to the pixel-hungry Meta Quest 3 when subjected to the performance demands of iRacing, AMS2 and ACC? Let's find out ASAP. Benchmark settings. When comparing the 3070 to the 4070 Super in VR, using the Quest 3 in my case, there are lots of variables, lots and lots of them, and they all need to be taken into consideration. So, in the interest of full clarity, let me tell you about how I conducted my tests to compare the 3070 to the 4070 Super using iRacing, ACC and AMS2. Firstly, the Quest 3 is connected to my PC via a USB 3 cable, which connects directly to a USB-C socket on the back of my mainboard. For this connection, the Oculus app reports a pass-through of 2.2 gigabits per second. I have seen this go up to 2.3, but on this particular test occasion, it was 2.2, so make of that what you will.
Absolutely surreal.
Secondly, I'm going to test the 3070 and the 4070 Super using the same settings in the Oculus app as seen here, and with the Oculus debug tool set to these modest settings. I'm going to push that a little bit later in the review for the 4070, but for the moment, this is the baseline. Lastly, for the iRacing tests, the graphics settings will look like this. I'm going to look at AMS2 and the ACC settings a little later in this video. They don't really apply to each other. They all have different types of graphical settings, so there's no real baseline. But for iRacing, it's this. Your settings are going to be different from mine. So take that into account when looking at my results, as you might not see the same sort of performance on your PC. The astute of you will have noticed that I'm using 72 Hertz. And also that the Hertz is doubled up here. That's a bug that Meta still haven't got around to fixing. But yes, I'm using 72 Hertz. And the reason for this can be expressed in two words: performance headroom. While 90 Hz looks undeniably smoother, it sucks the performance out of my system when using the 3070, which can lead to some very erratic frame rates on some tracks, which is the last thing you need when you're in the middle of a race. Look at this example. Here I am in the Formula V, racing an actual multiplayer race, not AI. These are real people. At the Charlotta track with a layout designed for this car. If I display the VR headset recordings for this particular session at 72 Hz and 90 Hz side by side, you can see the performance headroom for the 72 Hz on the left here is hovering around roughly 55%, with some variation up and down depending on where I am on the track. But on the right, the same track, the same car, and the same graphic settings in iRacing shows a performance headroom that drops to about 38%, sometimes with a few lows in the 20%. But I can hear you asking, older gamer, you well-preserved sim racer you, even when the performance headroom drops to the low 20s, there is still no loss of frames, so what's the problem? Play it at 90 Hz on the 3070 and enjoy a race without glitches. The answer to that response is just one word: Okayama. At the start of 2024's Season 1, iRacing updated a number of their tracks to include realistic vegetation and 3D curbs, the latter allowing you to feel the curbs with more authenticity. I have tried them, and they are pretty good. But these additions come at a cost and have made the track a nightmare for performance headroom, specifically if you are using a VR headset like the Quest 3. At 72 Hz, this track is very unpredictable, with the performance headroom only obtaining a max of 40% in some parts of the track, while falling to the low 20s in others. At this particular corner, pretty much every time I encountered it, the performance headroom fell to single digits, with the system often resorting to dropping frames in order to cope. Similar story when coming past the pits. At 90 Hz, oh wow, it is predictably worse, with the performance headroom rarely hitting double digits for the entire track and often languishing in the negative area, showing drop frames all over the place. For a fast-paced racing sim, this is pretty much unplayable. And this isn't the only example of a track offering some pretty poor performance. At Virginia International, it's not as bad as Okayama, but I see a performance hit at the same corner every single time. If I stop at the corner during a practice lap, you can see the drop in performance, and it has nothing to do with speed or other cars. There aren't any. It's just simply that this part of the course is, for whatever reason, poorly optimized. I would love to keep my headset at 90 Hz using the 3070, but the unpredictable performance headroom on some tracks means I can't afford to risk binning my car due to a large frame rate drop, especially when lots of other cars are around me, lots of other players. In my experience, it's much better to keep the headset at 72Hz and enjoy the smoother drop frame free version of iRacing with plenty of performance headroom on most tracks. And then I don't have to keep remembering which tracks need to be at 72Hz and which need to be at 90Hz. I can just go in and race with confidence. Of course, the question now is, can the 4070 Super improve on this situation? Can I start to use 90Hz consistently with the Quest 3 with the slider set to maximum to give native resolution in this headset, but at the same time maintain a stable frame rate on all the tracks in iRacing, or for that matter, AMS2 and ACC? Let's test now the 4070 Super and try to answer those questions. iRacing, the Quest 3 and the 4070 Super. Before I tested the 4070 Super with iRacing, I ran the USB connection test again, just to make sure everything was working as expected, and it returned a result of 2.6, which is a bit quicker than the 3070 at 2.2. I have no idea if the 4070 Super influenced this result or not. Comment below if you know the answer to this conundrum. I am testing the 4070 Super with the same settings I used for the 3070. Oculus app is set like this, the Oculus debug tool is still set on the Modest 250, and the iRacing settings are as shown here. And on the track at Charlotte again, in the V, the 3070 is on the left and the 4070 Super is on the right, both running at 90Hz. And straight away on the line, the 4070 Super is displaying more than double the performance headroom in comparison to the 3070. Through the first corner, the readouts are about equal, but with the 3070 struggling to consistently hold this performance headroom, while the 4070 Super shows more consistency and what looks like a much more assured ability to hold on to this higher headroom. But, as we saw earlier, Charlotte is a relatively undemanding track in iRacing, performance-wise. The question now should be, what can the 4070 Super do at these settings at Okayama? Again, on the left is the 3070 at 90Hz and the 4070 Super on the right at 90Hz. On the line at Okayama, things look better with the 4070 Super. Not ideal, as the performance headroom is only just into positive figures, although the 3070 is languishing permanently below the line and turning in constant negative percentage values. As the race moves on, the 4070 Super does improve, but the 3070 is left well behind. At this particular demanding corner, the 3070 Super drops down to 45 FPS and the 4070 Super remains at around 80 FPS. This test would seem to indicate that I can keep the Quest 3 at 90Hz for even the most performance demanding tracks using the 4070 Super, but it's clearly not the optimal way to use the Quest 3 with iRacing and the 4070 Super. So, which refresh rate should I use? Unsurprisingly, the refresh rate that offered the best stability with the 4070 Super and iRacing was one with the words recommended setting written next to it. Go figure. Here you can see all three refresh rates, left to right. That is the 90Hz, the 80Hz and the 72Hz. While 80Hz did show a slight performance headroom advantage over 90Hz, I did find there are some areas of the course where it dropped frames, and the 90 did not, which is weird. But if you look at the 72Hz on the right, you can see the 4070 Super offering a performance headroom that is far superior to both 80 or 90Hz. For Okayama and its new 3D curbs, the performance headroom offered by 72Hz is pretty impressive. If I compare the 3070 seen on the left here with the 4070 Super on the right, both running at 72Hz, you can clearly see the remarkable improvement the 4070 Super offers. Sure, it's not what I wished for, which was playing at 90Hz, but to be honest, if I am being honoured this sort of performance headroom on a track as demanding as Okayama while playing an AI race, arguably more demanding on the computer than a multiplayer online race, then I'm going to grab that performance headroom with both hands. I might even, in my most optimistic mood of the day, decide that the 4070 Super, when used at 72Hz, is actually ready for when iRacing introduce rain. whenever that may be. And to be honest with you, I've never really been that hung up with refresh rates. I play on a monitor that offers a refresh rate of 75 Hz. So for me, using the Quest 3 at 72 Hz is not a big thing. If you're on a monitor that offers 100 Hz or something like that, maybe it's going to be an issue for you. Finally, after some experimentation, I found I could bump up the Oculus debug tool to 500 and use these settings in iRacing with sharpening turned on and the shadows turned on, with no impact on performance, as shown here. It really is nice to see the shadows from track objects such as trees and cars back again in the sim, as this really does add to the immersion factor, especially when driving in VR. With these settings in place, I also ran a test lap at Virginia International, and guess what? That troublesome corner, well, it won't be bothering me anymore, which is a massive relief. And then just for giggles, I ran a 60-car race at another demanding track in iRacing, Norway's Rudskogen Motor Centre, or however you pronounce that, and the performance headroom on this track ran smooth and problem-free. Seen here, I am starting in the middle of the pack and saw little to no drop in FPS at all throughout the entire race, even with the 60 Formula Vs puffing smoke out all over the place. One last test I tried was to ramp up everything to 11, with all settings at high, and then took yet another tour of Okayama in the Formula V in an AI race. As you can see, the performance headroom, once it settled down from the start where I normally see a fluctuation, averaged out at around 50% for most of the course, and with virtually no dips at all in FPS. And it has to be said that at this level of graphic fidelity, iRacing looks pretty damn good. Still nowhere near as realistic as AMS2 or indeed ACC, but still very nice and a little less PlayStation 3 that it did look like on the 3070. However, that being said, I'm never going to sim race at these high settings. Most of the options are, in my opinion, completely unnecessary for racing day to day. I mean, will cheering crowds really make you run a lap faster? I doubt it. But it's nice to know the 4070 Super is capable of doing this, should I ever be mad enough to want to do it. So I'll be turning down a lot of the settings, but I'll probably leave shadows on because I found those to be very immersive. Needless to say, at the end of all this testing and seeing how much headroom the 4070 Super gives me in iRacing, albeit at 72 Hz, I came away as a very happy bunny. AMS2, the Quest 3 and the 4070 Super. So that was iRacing, but what does the 4070 Super do for the AMS2 in VR that the 3070 found troublesome? Here you can see the 3070 on the left and the 4070 Super on the right. Again, the settings are the same for both tests as seen in championship mode. Here you can see I am again gifted an increase in performance headroom by the virtuous power of the 4070 Super, and I'm able to push the settings a bit. Not all the way in AMS2, but I still have a safety margin here to play with when the developers improve something or other and drop the FPS for everyone. And it has to be said, it looks gorgeous, and in my opinion, a little less gamey than iRacing and a little more realistic. In a future video, I'm going to look more closely at the settings of the 4070 and how it can push AMS2. But the too long didn't read conclusion is the boost for AMS2 using the 4070 Super is not massive, but it's certainly worth having. ACC, the Quest 3 and the 4070 Super. Next up is ACC, which I have to admit I have only just got into, so my ability to test this software is, for the moment, somewhat limited. That being said, I still threw myself into championship mode in ACC, using both the same custom graphical settings for the 3070 and the 4070 Super. You can see the performance headroom on the left for the 3070 and on the right for the 4070 Super, and in some sections of the track the 4070 Super is significantly better than the 3070. So much so this allowed me to push the settings, the graphical settings, a little bit further. I couldn't manage to get anything playable with the VR epic setting, but a modified version of VR High worked very well. But as I say, I am just getting to know ACC, so if anyone has any tips for me on how to improve the graphical settings while keeping the performance headroom in the safe zone, please comment below. Either way, it has to be said that ACC is probably the prettiest sim racer I have tested in this video. If you know of a better looking sim racer, please let me know in the comments. ACC also seemed to benefit from the power of the 4070 Super using the Quest 3 and offered a more stable and consistent headroom over the 3070 at pretty much any point on the track and in the rain as well, which is really impressive. GT3 Brands Hatch on all three sims. Just for a laugh, I created this completely unscientific test with all three sims racing Brands Hatch driving the GT3. It's unscientific because each sim approaches graphical settings from a different angle, so there is no real baseline that can be set. But just for fun and giggles, here is a rough comparison of the three sims from a performance headroom point of view. Here we have iRacing on the far left, AMS2 in the middle, and ACC on the right. At the top is the 3070 at 72 Hz, and at the bottom is the 4070 Super at 72 Hz. Now, as you can see, as we go around the track there, the 4070 Super has definitely made a difference. You can see that there is an actual performance boost here in these sims. I wouldn't say it's like mind-blowing. It's not night and day that you would see this. It's not like the performance headroom is blasting through the ceiling here. But at the same time, it's not insignificant either. And as I said earlier, with iRacing, it's going to introduce rain soon. And with AMS2 and ACC, there'll be improvements on that as well, which will probably hit performance. So it's good to have some kind of wiggle room in your performance headroom into which your computer can grow as the sim racer that you're using becomes more taxing, becomes more detailed, and it becomes more, in iRacing's case, weathery. Conclusion. All in all then, the 4070 Super is a significant improvement to my system over my old 3070. A card that did really well for me, not only in the gaming time that I had, but also creating these videos that I share with you. The 4070 Super gives me a performance headroom gain that is dependent on the software that I am using. ACC seems to get a bigger boost from this card than AMS2, but AMS2 does show improvement as well, although it wasn't as much as perhaps I hoped. And iRacing improves significantly, although arguably it has less capable graphics than the other two titles. Regardless of this, I only saw significant gains if I was prepared to stick with 72 Hz. Otherwise, the gains were negligible at best over the 3070. So, will using my Quest 3 at 70 Hz be an issue for me? No, is the short answer. As I said earlier, I am used to gaming at 75 Hz on my monitor, so 72 Hz on my VR headset doesn't ever feel like a problem to me. You may feel differently, and if you need the higher refresh rate in your VR headset, the 4070 Super may not be the card for you. Even the 4070 Ti Super may not be enough, and you should perhaps be looking at the 4080 Super with its eye-watering price, or perhaps even waiting for the 50 series to appear at some point in the future, possibly early next year. Here in the present day, my upgrade to the 4070 Super is a boost in performance that allows me to increase my settings, the graphical settings, in all three sims, but still enjoy a drop frame free environment, one where all the sims I am using look absolutely stunning. I didn't mention thermals in this comparison review, mostly because I don't really have the equipment to actually measure temperatures, but I can show you this, which is my GoPro filming my PC monitor while I was testing the sims using the 3070. Please forgive the graphics, I filmed this with a GoPro because I didn't want whatever I was filming the GPU-Z performance statistics with to impact the performance of the interaction between the card and the sim software, if you See what I mean? Anyway, here on the left is the 3070 and on the right is the 4070 Super. Using the GPU-Z app to monitor the graphics card, the major points of interest for these cards are the temperatures, the power draw, where the fans max out while all this is going on, and also of interest is this little readout at the bottom which tells you why your GPU is maxed out at any particular time. With the 3070, you can see the fans are maxed at 100%. Only 2 show here, but I assure you there were 3 doing helicopter impersonations during the rigors of an iRacing session, mostly because the temperatures of the 3070 were very high, and at times climbed even higher than you can see here. The power draw was also quite high at 250 watts. And at the bottom I was getting green and purple in the performance cap reading. Green is the card reaching the maximum power, and that's perfectly normal. But purple indicates the card is showing thermal throttling. In other words, it's slowing down because it's getting too hot, and it's worried it will crash and burn. Quite literally.
For real?
The 4070, however, is showing temperatures that are much lower. Power draw less at 218 watts, and some fan speed that can be best described as relaxed at 50%. Clearly, this card can be pushed further. So, after all this testing, am I happy? I would say yes. Looking at the speed improvements the 4070 Super offers me, not only on track with increased graphical settings, but as a content creator as well, I am super pleased with the Super card. If nothing else, I'm pleased to see the increased amount of RAM up to 12GB from 8GB, which will make my life easier when pursuing my animation projects. Another story for another time. And also, I won't have to worry so much about how hot the 3070 was getting, or how much power it was drawing, as the 4070 is significantly better in both of those regards. This improvement in performance and hopefully reliability should mean that I'm also in a good position to start live streaming. At last, something a number of you have requested. But do I feel the 4070 Super offers value for money? That's a trickier question to answer. Overall, I feel the cost of Nvidia cards are just too high. There's no getting away from it. But I use animation software that doesn't work with AMD cards. So the price is what it is. I need an Nvidia card, and you can either afford one and willing to pay the high price of one, or you're not. I will recoup some of the cost when I sell my 3070, but still, the 4070 Super is a major cost upgrade, and one that you should think about long and hard before pulling the trigger on that purchase. I did see a performance increase, but whether or not it was worth the cost will depend on how long the card stays relevant and how soon I need to replace it. Hopefully that won't be too soon, but with the new Tempest weather system due to hit iRacing soon, I really can't say for sure. Finally, I just want to say that this video has been an epic journey for me. I have really enjoyed putting together the footage and learnt a lot along the way about the various graphical settings of the sims I use. Every day I learn a bit more about sim racing, and every day I find there is even more to learn. Until next time, race clean, and I will see you on track.
You're halfway through. Keep pushing.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe. Click the little bell icon if you want to be notified of any future videos.